Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're going to be doing an Ice Barrier deck profiles. I've been working a lot on this deck recently for you guys because I know a lot of you guys have been commenting down below and asking for an Ice Barrier update. It's a very awesome deck that actually synchro summons like crazy and has some really insane combos ever since the structure deck was released. So, without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can come part of notifications, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards, like getting your name description every single video, getting a signed card to the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month to your patron along with test hands. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're going to be playing 3 copies of Revealer of the Ice Barrier, which this card is a very good card in the deck and one of the best cards in the entire deck that has the ability that while you control another Ice Barrier monster, your opponent cannot tribute summon, which actually comes up quite often, and it's actually going to be really good against Flunderies when they come over here. So what this card actually does is once per turn, you can discard 1 card to special summon 1 Ice Barrier tuner from your deck, and also you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of the turn except water monsters. And if you would discard or send a card from your hand to the graveyard to activate an Ice Barrier monster's effect, you can manage this card from your graveyard instead of one of those cards, which is pretty good and is a really good starter card for this particular deck to be able to just get this card out on the field and then get you a tuner from the deck. We then play 3 copies of Speaker for the Ice Barrier. This card is also a great card in this deck. And then while you control an Ice Barrier monster, defense position monsters your opponent controls cannot change their battle position. You only affect this card once per turn. That if you control an Ice Barrier monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And if you control an Ice Barrier monster, you can manage this card from your graveyard to give yourself an Ice Barrier token that's a level 1, which helps you go into cards like Trishula and Trishula Sub-Zero Dragon. This card is just super helpful in this particular deck to go into all sorts of crazy plays. We then play 3 copies of General Wayne of the Ice Barrier. General Wayne is a fantastic extender in this deck. The spell and trap cards sent from the field to your opponent's graveyard are banished instead. You only use effect of this card once per turn. And if your opponent controls a monster and you control an Ice Barrier monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. And if this card is normal or special summon, you get to add an Ice Barrier spell or trap from your deck to your hand. This card is so good in this particular deck. It's a free extender. It gets you a search and it stops your opponent by banishing all their spells and traps, which is really helpful in this particular deck. We then played 2 copies of Hexa, the Spirit of the Ice Barrier. Hexa is really good because while you control another Ice Barrier monster, your opponent loses 500 attack defense, or all their monsters lose 500 attack defense. And then during your main phase, you can send 1 level 3 or lower Ice Barrier monster from your deck to the graveyard. And if you do, this card's level becomes the same level as that monster until the end phase of the turn, which is super helpful to just get you a monster that basically copies the level of other monsters to be able to go into some really good synchro plays. We then play 2 copies of Prior of the Ice Barrier. Prior is if you control an Ice Barrier monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, but you cannot special summon level 5 or higher monsters for the rest of the turn, which is a little bit of a shame. I really hate that effect that he just stops you from special summoning level 5 or higher, which I've kind of worked around that in this particular deck, but he's still really good, so you do play him as a 2-up. He also has the ability that you can tribute this card and then target 1 face-up or 1 Ice Barrier monster in your graveyard and special summon that target. Usually you just normal summon him to special summon the Ice Barrier back from the graveyard, but there is sometimes that you will special summon him as an extender to go into a link play, but it's really unfortunate of that other effect. We then play a single copy of Zanjin. Zanjin is really good because he has the ability that you could tribute this card to special summon 1 level 5 or higher Ice Barrier monster from your hand. You're really never going to use that effect to be able to special summon them from your hand, but the other really cool effect is you only play your copy of General Wayne, which he has a really good other effect that if this card is sent to the graveyard, then you get to target level 3 or higher water monster you control, reduce its level by exactly 2, and if you do, special summon this card but banish it when it leaves field, which is really helpful because if you're trying to go into a copy of Trishula, sometimes you will need 3 monsters, so this card pretty much becomes the 3rd monster that you'll need. We then play a single copy of Defender of the Ice Barrier. Defender is the card that I choose to play for the level 3 tuner for this deck. And then while you control another Ice Barrier monsters your opponent controls cannot declare attacks if their attack is greater or equal to this card's defense. So you throw this card in defense position as well as a 1600 and it's just really good. We play a single copy of Strategist of the Ice Barrier as a 1-of. Once per turn, you can send an Ice Barrier monster from your hand to the grave to let you draw a card. He also is a spellcaster, which helps out a lot in this deck to be able to have a spellcaster to activate his effect to be able to draw cards and summon stuff like Gigabyte to your side of the field. We then play a Frog Engine in here. I think the deck is not complete without a Frog Engine. So you play 3 copies of Swap Frog. Swap Frog is really good because you can special summon this card from your hand by discarding any water monster. And then when this card is special summoned, you get to send a level 2 or lower water aqua monster from your deck to the graveyard. And then once per turn, you return 1 monster you control to your hand. And then normal summon another Frog monster from your hand during your main phase, which is pretty good in addition to your normal summoner set, which is pretty good to just give you an additional normal summon. And plus, it's a level 2 aqua, and so is Prior of the Ice Barrier, which is why I play him as a 2/2. We play the same copy of Dupe Frog. Dupe Frog is basically just here to send to the graveyard off your copy of Swap Frog. Swap Frog is really good, or Dupe Frog is really good because when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you get to add a frog monster from your deck to your graveyard to your hand. We then play the same copy of Ronin Totem. Ronin Totem is really good too because you can banish any frog monster from your graveyard to be able to special summon this card back from the graveyard, which helps out a lot. We play 3 copies of Silent Angler. Silent Angler can special summon itself from your hand if you control a water monster, but you can't special summon anything from your hand for the rest of the turn. I play 2 copies of Gigabyte. Gigabyte can special summon itself from your hand if you control a spellcaster monster, which you have quite a few spellcasters in this deck. All of these, which is 6 targets, and then 7 right here with the strategist. So you actually have like 7 targets in this particular main deck alone that you can special summon this card with. I did bump it down to 2 because I'm playing the 3 copies of Silent Angler, but these are basically here to help you go into synchro plays, and they're really, really good at it. And then for the last 3 monsters, we're playing 3 copies of Ash Blossom. The 3 Ash Blossoms are basically just here to stop your opponent from all sorts of shenanigans. They're really good in this particular deck because they stop your opponent from all sorts of stuff when they try and touch the deck and help you control the field a little bit. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to be playing a single copy of Foolish Burial because it can help you get your toads to the graveyard, can help you get a bunch of monsters in the graveyard to go into some really, really good plays. 1 copy of Called by the Grave because it's going to stop your opponent's hand traps. 3 copies of Medallion of the Ice Barrier, which up until the structure deck, this card was the best card outside of the dragons because it lets you add any Ice Barrier monster or any Ice Barrier monster from your deck to your hand. It's a 3F Rhoda essentially in this deck, which is just ridiculously good. This card is just so helpful to add any of those Ice Barrier monsters from your deck to your hand. Play 3 copies of Freezing Chains of the Ice Barrier, which is kind of funny because that was actually the name of the structure deck, which was called Freezing Chains. When this card is activated, you get to target a level 4 or lower Ice Barrier monster in your graveyard and special summon it back to your field, which is just really good to have basically a monster reborn. And then also, while you control 3 or more Ice Barrier monsters, you can Ice Barrier monsters you control are unaffected by the activated effects of your opponent's monsters that were special summoned from the extra deck, which is pretty good because it basically locks down your Ice Barriers where they're protected by the Freezing Chains. We then play 3 copies of Winds Over the Ice Barrier, which is my favorite artwork of all of the Ice Barrier cards. You get to tribute any number of Ice Barrier monsters to special summon from your deck as many level 4 or lower Ice Barrier monsters with different names with each other. And then during your main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from the graveyard and then target 1 of your Ice Barrier monsters that is banished or in the graveyard and add it back to your hand, which is really helpful for the deck as well because it can let you trade them out to go into some really awesome synchro plays. So that's it for the spells, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing a single copy of Trishula, Zero Dragon of the Ice Barrier. This card is an awesome boss monster in this deck. He's actually generic, so you can throw him into a bunch of different decks, but he's really helpful in this deck. That he requires a tuner and 2 non-tuner monsters, just like the old school Trishula. And when this card is synchro summoned, you can banish up to 3 cards your opponent controls. And then if synchro summoned by its, if this card synchro summon card in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, then you can special summon 1 Trishula from your extra deck or graveyard, and its attack becomes 3,300. And then half the attack of any face-up monster your opponent controls, and also negate their effects. And you can only use effect of this card once per turn. We then play a single copy of Trishula. This card is just so good because basically this card just banishes stuff like the Sub-Zero Dragon. The Sub-Zero Dragon banishes up to 3 cards your opponent controls, where Trishula banishes from the hand, field, and graveyard, which is really cool. You have to banish 1 from each, and then it's random what they banishes from the hand. This card is just so good. Play a single copy of Satellite Warrior. Satellite Warrior is a card that you'll usually summon on your opponent's turn because you're going to use something like your Quandrax to be able to go into this card really easily after you summon Needle Fiber during your turn. time. This card is really helpful in this deck because it's just going to let you go and pop a bunch of cards your opponent controls, and plus it's a really good card to actually just summon against your opponent. One copy of Ravenous Croco Dragon. Croco Dragon is really good too because for every card in your hand, it gains 500, which is just a really good effect to be able to just have a big water monster on your field. And if this card is Synchro Summon, you get to draw cards equal to the total number of cards you use to Synchro Summon this card, which is usually like 3. And then quick effect, you can discard 2 cards and then target 1 card on the field and destroy it, which is pretty good as well. We play a single copy of Borreload Savage because it's really helpful to just special summon this card and then grab a copy of Needle Fiber from the graveyard and then basically make this card a walking negation that's really big. One copy of Adamancipator Risen Dragite because it can negate spell or traps if you have a water monster in the graveyard. White Aura Whale, I love this card in this deck. When it's summoned, it basically board wipes all your opponent's monsters that are in attack position. It basically mirror forces them. You can attack twice during each battle phase on monsters, which is pretty cool as well. It inflicts piercing damage as well, and if this card you control is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, by battle or by card effect, and sent to the graveyard, you can banish 1 water monster from your grave to special summon this card, but if you do, it's treated as a tuner, which is pretty good as well. Play a single copy of Riser Dragon. Riser Dragon is pretty neat in this deck too, because if this card is Synchro Summon, you can just send a card from your deck to the graveyard that's a monster, and then this card level is reduced by that monster's level. So this card can be pretty much any level tuner that you want it to be, which is really helpful. One copy of Stardust Charge Warrior. When it's Synchro Summon, it lets you draw a card. You kind of want to lean towards water monsters because there's certain cards in the deck that make you go into only water, but this card is really helpful because you can actually use this plus Quandrax to go into your copy of Satellite Warrior to be able to pop cards your opponent controls, which is really, really awesome in this deck. One copy of Bahamut Shark because it's really easy to summon in this deck to be able to summon out your Toads even faster. We play Double Toad in this deck because Toad is just awesome, totally awesome. And it negates spell traps and monster effects and then sets them to your field, which is really good. And it summons frogs from your deck, which is just really nice. One copy of Marincess Coral Anemone. Basically, when this card is link summon, you get to target a water monster with 1500 or less attack in the graveyard and special summon it to a zone this card points to. And you cannot special summon monsters or rest turn except water, which is pretty good. And then a single copy of Needle Fiber, which Needle Fiber gets your tuner monsters out of the deck to be able to go into synchro plays and also contribute itself during your opponent's turn to summon Quandrax. And if you already have Stardust Charge Warrior on the field, which is also pretty easy to summon in this deck, you're just going to be able to immediately go for Satellite Warrior and then pop cards on the field. So this card is actually really, really insanely good in this deck, and it's water too. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you enjoy it. It's a really fun deck to be able to play around with. I highly recommend that if you guys have not picked up Ice Barriers and tried to play with them, they are really, really fun to be able to play with. I really love the way the deck actually can just synchro summon into all sorts of crazy cards. And it's just really, really fun. It's actually fairly budget as well, because the deck it was printed in a structure deck, and the majority of the stuff that I put in here was actually from the structure deck. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.